wasted so much of my life doing the most stupid things.
I'm not sure I follow you there. I mean, jealous of what?
Sir Elton John was never one to keep his thoughts quiet, and he didn't mind if that made some people see him as an opponent. If he believed someone's music was truly bad, he would say so for everyone to hear, loud and clear. This piece will explore 5 times when people and music trends faced the full impact of his powerful and fiery viewpoints. 1. Oasis.
Yeah, people kind of take comments that people make and twist them and all that, but,
No other modern band has faced Elton John's public anger quite like Oasis. He didn't just complain about them in private. He criticized them loudly, clearly, and famously used curse words to do it. For Elton, the story of Oasis and its leaders, brothers Liam and Noel Gallagher, was a sad tale of wasted talent and huge mistakes. He saw a band that had the entire world in its hands, but, in his opinion, threw it all away because they were arrogant and unprofessional.
I always pick the set list, and if anybody's got a problem with it, they say, right, I'm not doing that, I'm not doing that, I'm not doing that. It's the same with the track list, and I picked it.
His anger boiled over in a famous interview where he called the brothers stupid shits. This wasn't just a random insult, it was his final judgment on a band he had watched with growing disappointment. To understand why he felt so strongly, you have to look at it from Elton's point of view. He was a man who worked incredibly hard to become a star all over the world, especially in America, where it's very tough to succeed. He knew that it takes a special mix of talent, hard work, and good behavior to not just get famous, but to stay famous. In the mid-1990s, Oasis was bigger in Britain than any band in years. They had the hit songs, the cool attitude, and the excitement to become true world superstars. America was ready for them. But according to Elton, they blew it. He heard stories about them canceling tours, fighting on stage, and constantly arguing with each other. He didn't see this as cool rock and roll behavior. He saw it as a total lack of discipline and a lack of respect for the amazing chance they were given.
We're halfway through the 4th number, and the gig, for once.
A key moment that really angered him was how the band handled a very important American tour in 1996. Right when their album, What's the Story, Morning Glory, was becoming a massive hit, Liam Gallagher suddenly left the tour before it even started, saying he had to go buy a house. He came back later, but the fighting continued, and the band ended up canceling the rest of the tour. For Elton, who had toured for decades, even when he was sick or having personal problems, this was just unacceptable.
Okay, they go back. You can't go back any further. You can only go back.
It was rude to the fans who had paid for tickets and a total disregard for being a professional. His stupid shits comment was the explosion of all that frustration. He was sad about what they could have become. He wasn't really attacking their music, which he knew was great and popular. He was attacking the way they acted.
I'm not saying it was written directly as a retort to that, but
he believed they didn't get that being in a band is a job and a promise you make to your fans. The Gallagher brothers, acting just as you'd expect, pretty much ignored Elton's comments. Noel Gallagher has often laughed it off, sometimes saying Elton was just old and didn't understand the wild energy of a real rock band. Noel once shot back that he didn't need advice from someone who made some very questionable music in the 1980s.
A word in it, to be honest, But it's kind of who's got the biggest sob story this year, isn't it?
But Elton's point wasn't about the music, it was about their legacy. He saw the Gallaghers wasting their chance to be as important as the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, bands that dealt with their own problems to build careers that lasted for 50 years. In his mind, Oasis chose fighting over greatness and self-destruction over hard work. It was a failure of character, and for a music business survivor like Elton John, that was the worst crime of all. His problem with the next band wasn't their bad behavior, but their boring sound. 2. The Rolling Stones.
But he's often critical of you then?
He's not happy.
When people think of British rock legends, 2 names always come up: Elton John and the Rolling Stones. Both shaped music history, but friendship, that was never on the table, especially between Elton and the Stones' wild guitarist, Keith Richards. This wasn't a small spat. It was a years-long feud packed with sharp insults, brutal jabs, and some very personal anger. It wasn't about musical styles or creative differences. What set things off was pure disrespect, or at least what Elton saw as it. The moment that lit the fire? In the late 1990s, right after Elton's moving performance of Candle in the Wind at Princess Diana's funeral, Keith Richards mocked the song, saying Elton's music was made for dead blondes. Yes, that's a real quote. He also dismissed Elton's work as novelty records.
No, I mean, he's not a happy person.
What do you mean?
What I said. You can't understand that, you can't understand anything.
That crossed a line. Elton snapped back, calling Richards pathetic and a monkey with arthritis, mocking his stage presence and suggesting the Rolling Stones should just get rid of him. He didn't just insult Keith. He tore into his identity as a performer. And unlike many celebrity clashes, this one didn't cool off with time. At the core of the feud was one simple truth. Elton took his work seriously. He didn't just make music, he treated it as a responsibility. The tribute to Princess Diana wasn't just another gig, it was a deeply emotional moment shared with the world. So for Keith to mock it, that felt like a punch to the gut.
Although there's no evidence the two men have feuded in the past, Eden says Elton was clearly furious with Richards.
What made things worse was their total difference in how they approached the stage. Elton was known for his flair and costumes, but behind the glitter was a perfectionist. He respected his fans, showed up on time, and poured effort into every show. Keith Richards, on the other hand, was the poster child for rock and roll chaos, proudly messy, rebellious, and sometimes sloppy. To Elton, that wasn't cool. It was careless. And it felt like a mockery of everything he stood for.
As far as a lot of younger people are concerned, the Rolling Stones have been there forever. Whether they want them to be there or not is another thing, but it's a fact.
Even years later, the bitterness stuck. Elton felt Keith had broken an unspoken code among musicians. You don't publicly trash someone's most vulnerable moment, especially when it's tied to grief. This wasn't playful teasing. It was personal. That's why this feud didn't fade like others. It was rooted in a real clash, not just of personalities, but of principles. Elton didn't just feel insulted, he felt betrayed. And while both men are icons, this battle proved that legends can still hold lifelong grudges, especially when pain is met with mockery. So when Elton called Keith nasty and uncalled for, that was probably the softest part of his response. Because for Elton, this wasn't just about music, it was about respect. And once that was gone, there was no turning back. 3. Electric Light Orchestra.
Richard.
My name's Richard Tandy. I play the moog and the piano, and I joined the group from the start, and since then I've never looked back.
Elton John's issue with the Electric Light Orchestra had nothing to do with their attitude and everything to do with their music. His strong dislike for ELO, the project of the careful producer and writer Jeff Lynne, shows how one music legend can find another's work totally awful. In his honest book, Me, Elton does not hold back. He calls ELO's clean, heavily produced style bland and clinical. He plainly admits, I couldn't stand their records. This wasn't a small complaint. It was a deep disagreement with the very sound that made ELO one of the biggest bands of the 1970s. To get why Elton felt this way, you have to look at the music he loved. His own songs were built on the foundation of raw, emotional American music. He loved the powerful piano playing of Little Richard, the sad blues of Ray Charles, and the honest songs of artists like the band. For Elton, good rock and roll needed to have feeling, a bit of messiness, and a real human touch. It should sound like it came from real passion, not like it was built in a science lab.
Well, I wouldn't say it was fun exactly, but it's something that I want to do because I do want people to know that these songs are out there, the new versions, and of course Long Wave, because I'm so proud of Long Wave. It's my favourite record I ever made, I think.
Well, yeah.
And I think that's because I don't have to judge the songs. You know, I can just leave them alone because they were already brilliant. I know that. I didn't have anything to do with that.
When he listened to ELO, he heard the complete opposite. He heard music that, to him, had been wiped clean of any of that raw emotion. Jeff Lynne was a master in the recording studio, a perfectionist who layered strings, synthesizers, and weird vocals to create a perfect space-age sound. Songs like Mr. Blue Sky and Evil Woman were amazing examples of production, with every single note in the exact right place. But for Elton, That perfection was the problem. He heard the studio tricks, not the soul.
It is. It's great to have them finished, you know, and you see there's the middle and there's the start and there's the end, and it was...
The clinical sound he talked about was Jeff Lynne's total control, which left no space for the happy accidents or bursts of raw feeling that Elton loved in his own favorite songs. Millions of people loved Ello's rich, futuristic music, but Elton just heard a band that had traded the warmth of rock and roll for a cold technical skill. It sounded fake to him. It was a million miles away from the sweaty, exciting clubs and soulful recording studios where he had developed his own sound. With ELO, there was no surprise, no danger, and no feeling that the music could go in an unexpected direction. To him, it was too safe, too controlled, and in the end, just too bland. This artistic fight shows a big divide in 1970s rock music. On one side, you had artists like Elton. Even though his own shows were huge and flashy, his music was always connected to the real roots of rock and roll. On the other side were bands like ELO, who used the recording studio as their main instrument and cared most about getting a perfect sound. Elton's anger toward ELO was really him defending his own musical beliefs. He loved great songwriters, passionate singers, and the energy of a live band. Jeff Lynne, on the other hand, was the ultimate studio genius, building his songs piece by piece with amazing care. There was no big public fight between them. It was just a case of two very different artistic tastes. Elton simply couldn't enjoy music that felt so distant and perfectly built, music that removed the very flaws he believed gave rock its heart. But he disliked messy, raw music just as much as he disliked polished music. 3. The Velvet Underground. Deep inside his book, Me, Elton John makes a surprising confession. He was completely confused by one of rock's most respected and important bands, the Velvet Underground. His dislike for them wasn't about a rivalry or their attitude. It came from a place of pure confusion. He openly admits he just didn't get them, putting the New York band in the same group as other noisy indie acts and calling their music a mess. For a musician like Elton, who built his entire career on catchy melodies and perfectly written pop songs, the strange, difficult, and experimental sound of the Velvet Underground was like a foreign language he had no interest in learning. This disagreement shows a huge split in what people even think rock music is. Elton John is a master of classic pop songwriting, where things like a good tune, a strong chorus, and a clear story are the most important things. His songs, from Benny and the Jets to Tiny Dancer, are perfect examples of how to build a great pop song. They have verses that lead to powerful choruses and bridges that tie everything together. He believes in the power of a beautiful melody. The Velvet Underground, however, wanted to tear that whole idea apart. Guided by the artist Andy Warhol and led by the poet Lou Reed and the experimental musician John Cale, they were the exact opposite of pop. Their music explored the darkest parts of city life, singing about substances, strange desires, and feeling alone with a sound that was often raw, ugly, and meant to shock people. Just try to imagine Elton John, a piano genius who loves the soulful sounds of gospel music, sitting down and listening to the screeching violin on the song Venus in Furs, or the noisy, feedback-filled jam of Sister Ray. It's pretty easy to see why he would call it a mess. He looked for beautiful sounds, but the Velvet Underground often gave him noise. He tried to make music for everyone, but they seemed to enjoy making music that was difficult and challenging. The lo-fi or low-quality sound that Elton hated was actually a choice for them. They were rejecting the clean, polished sound of mainstream radio music because they wanted their songs to feel more real, honest, and gritty. They were not trying to write a #1 hit. They were trying to create the sound of the New York City streets, with all of its dark and scary feelings. The fact that Elton couldn't connect with their music says a lot about what he thinks is important in a song. He simply couldn't understand why anyone would like music that didn't have a strong, easy-to-follow melody. He couldn't hear the genius that so many critics and musicians after them fell in love with. Lou Reed's incredibly honest lyrics about real life, John Cale's wild experiments with sound, and the band's huge influence on the punk and alternative rock that followed. This wasn't a case of him being a snob. It just showed how deeply he believed in his own way of making music. He was a master of pop, and the Velvet Underground's art was so different that he heard it not as another style, but as a complete failure to make good music. He also clashed with a band that was just as loud and famous as he was. 5. The Who. The relationship between Elton John and The Who was a complicated mix of competition, respect, and tension. Unlike his simple dismissal of a band like ELO, his feelings about The Who were shaped during the 1970s, when they were two of the biggest and loudest live acts in the world. They were always aware of each other. While it wasn't a nasty fight like his issue with Oasis, there was a strong sense of competition that defined their relationship. Elton John was the king of piano-based glam rock. The Who were the masters of smashing guitars and creating loud rock operas. They were both fighting to be the biggest band in the world, and their very different styles often created friction between them. The most famous time their careers crossed paths was when Elton appeared as the Pinball Wizard in the 1975 movie version of The Who's famous rock opera, Tommy.
It was just his subject matter, and he just found us in this club and he made that film.
His performance, where he wore giant platform boots and played a pinball machine like a piano, became the most memorable scene in the entire film. On the outside, it looked like a great moment of two rock legends working together, but behind the scenes it showed the tension between them. Elton brought his unique style of flashy entertainment to their project, and many people felt his version of the song was even better than the original. Stories from that time hint at some professional conflict, a clash between two giant stars and their teams. In his book, Elton admits that while he respected many of the musicians from that time, he wasn't a fan of all of them. The Who's loud, aggressive, guitar-heavy rock was very different from what he liked. Their rivalry was really a battle between two different ideas of rock and roll. Elton's performances were about glamour, catchy tunes, and a kind of over-the-top fun. He was the ultimate entertainer, the piano man at the center of a giant pop party. The Who's energy was wilder and more dangerous. Pete Townshend swinging his arm like a windmill to hit his guitar, Roger Daltrey's tough guy act, Keith Moon's drumming that sounded like bombs going off. Their show was built on the edge of chaos and raw power. Elton's music, even when it was loud, was always well-arranged and full of melody. The Who's sound was a glorious and often painfully loud attack of guitar, bass, and drums. Elton has made it clear that this kind of aggressive rock music was not his favorite thing to listen to.
But, you know, I miss him all the time. I mean, it's taken a lot of getting over that one.
He could respect their power and their importance in rock history, but their music didn't touch his heart in the way that soul and R&B music did. The competition between them was obvious during their peak in the mid-70s. They were two massive British bands taking over America at the same time. When The Who released their album, Quadrophenia, Elton released his masterpiece, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. The music magazines were always comparing them. Their tours were the biggest events of the year, and their new albums were treated like major cultural moments. This constant comparison naturally led to a rivalry. Elton has talked about how competitive that time was, when being number one on the charts or selling the most concert tickets was a sign of who was on top. While he might have respected Pete Townshend's songwriting ambitions, he was not a fan of the sheer volume and aggression that came with it. For Elton, The Who was a different type of rock band, one that was louder, angrier, and more about masculine power. Elton burned bridges, but did he burn the right ones? Whose side are you on? His or theirs? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.